Good afternoon. Welcome to this international seminar on the present situation in Myanmar, organized by Tillotoma Foundation. I am Kamakshi Wason, Vice President, Tillotoma Foundation. We gather this afternoon to discuss an issue of great regional and geopolitical and most importantly, humanitarian significance. Last year, after the coup took place in Myanmar, the Foundation organized a similar discussion titled Recent Coup in Myanmar, What's Next, and What Are Its Implications in March 2021. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia and Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh were a part of the seminar too. Around 1 year later, we will try to comprehensively analyze the recent developments in Myanmar and their implications. It is my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers for today, all of whom are very well known to me. Ambassador Professor Veena Sikri, former Indian High Commissioner to Bangladesh. Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, former Indian Ambassador to Myanmar. Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary East, MEA. Mr. Siswanto Rusdi, Director, National Maritime Institute, Indonesia and Honorary Convener, Indonesia Tillotoma Foundation. Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh, Head, Southeast Asia and Oceania Center, MP-IDSA. I will moderate this session. Thank you all so much for joining us here. It is my great pleasure to have you all among us again at Tillotoma Foundation. Our distinguished speakers, who are all senior diplomats or eminent experts with their respective areas and expertise, will cover the entire spectrum of the Myanmar crisis as it stands today. I have already indicated to you about the areas you can kindly focus on. I'm sure we will have an insightful discussion today. I especially thank Mr. Soham Das, Director, Tillotoma Foundation, for all his support and guidance in curating this event. I also request and am thankful to the members of the audiences who are watching us here with different platforms. Feel free to send in your questions. Let me now invite Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia to share his views. Over to you, Ambassador Bhatia.
Thank you very much, Kamakshi. Thank you to you for arranging this very interesting seminar. I'm really grateful to Tillotoma Foundation, which has sustained its interest in this region and particularly in all developments relating to Myanmar. And it's really my special honor and privilege to participate in this along with my dear friends and colleagues, both from the government and from the strategic community. I particularly extend a warm welcome to our friend from Indonesia, because we all would be hearing with great interest as to what he has to say on this subject. Now, knowing that one has about 8 to 10 minutes maximum, my attempt will be to highlight 4 specific facets of the situation, and then naturally it will be for others to take care of various other dimensions. Essentially, I'm raising 4 specific issues, maybe in the form of questions. Yeah. First issue or question is, what are the drivers behind the coup that took place on 1st February last year? So we can focus on that for a minute or two. I think much dialogue and discussion and debate have already taken place. It all begins with the Myanmar military's basic contention that the elections were fraudulent, that the voters' lists were full of flaws, and therefore the results that showed an overwhelming victory for the National League for Democracy was really not deserved. And once the government of the day and Election Commission refused to address those complaints, the military was left with no alternative but to go for the coup, or so they claim. The second explanation always has been to do with the political ambition of the military CNC, General Min Aung Hlaing, and the lack of personal chemistry between him and Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, which led to a virtual breakdown in this experiment of hybrid democracy. This is true up to a point, but still it does not explain the whole thing. And therefore, we come to the third and most credible explanation, which is that there has been a fundamental political and ideological clash, a clash of ideology and philosophy between NLD and the military leadership. The military leadership is very clear that it must maintain the unity of the country, and therefore democracy only up to a point is acceptable. It can also accept a federal approach, but only up to a point, because there is a long history of the ethnic groups and their armed organizations fighting for their causes, thereby creating instability in the country. So it is in that context, I think we have to recognize that the coup was caused not just by perceived fraud in the election, but fundamentally due to political ambition and the clash of philosophy and ideology. My second issue is how do we assess the developments of the past year? We all know that nearly 1,500 people have been killed in the violence that ensued. This is not counting the Myanmar soldiers, a very sizable number of whom also have been killed. Reports say that about 9,000 people are in Myanmar jails. There could be more. There's been a serious handicap for this country in handling the COVID catastrophe because of the instability. Economy is in doldrums. So there is a general malaise in the country, and the popular discontent with the military's actions and rule continue to be very vibrant. So in that context, we have to ask ourselves as to why the military has not been able to control and stabilize the situation. The answer is, unlike in the past, perhaps the present leadership is not as suave, as united, as astute. In the past, when a set of three generals ran the country for almost a decade or 2 decades, there was one who served as above everybody as the head of the state. There was another who really took charge of the army, and the third who took charge of the intelligence and foreign policy. And that way they could really manage things even in the most difficult time. But today the power seems to be concentrated in just one man, and there have been a lot of changes. And while without going into all those changes, what is clear is that the military is still finding its feet, and it's not showing the kind of astuteness that their predecessors showed. And the second reason why the control is still not there is because people have tasted freedom. The previous decade, when democracy came and was used, people have become very much conscious of their rights, and therefore they are unable and they are not willing to accept what the military has been essentially doing. The third question quickly is, what then is the way out? Now, if we are looking for a lasting solution, my conviction is that eventually it has to come from within the soil of Myanmar, from the people themselves. But right now, Myanmar does not have a Nelson Mandela or a Desmond Tutu, and therefore this reconciliation and compromise is unlikely to spring from the Myanmar soil in the short term. Therefore, the need is to look for an external mediator, and all eyes had been until now on ASEAN. But ASEAN has been having serious difficulties. I think within ASEAN, very clearly two camps have emerged, one Indonesia-led and the other Cambodia-led camps. There are divergences between the two, and as a result, ASEAN has become handicapped in carrying forward any serious mediation. And unlike in the past, ASEAN differences have now come out in the open. So clearly, ASEAN needs help. ASEAN has to get its act together, but it needs help. And I think this idea of the Friends of Myanmar group, which could be composed of Japan and also the UN Special Envoy on Myanmar. But in addition, maybe one or two other countries, such as India and Thailand, could also be included, so that first they decide internally as to what is the best way to move forward, and then try to produce some kind of a formula based on the 5-point consensus of ASEAN. One essential point I would like to make, based on one's familiarity with this country for the past 3 decades, I think the military is conveying directly and indirectly that it simply cannot work with Madame Aung San Suu Kyi. So the question is whether she will be part or she will not be part of a solution and the future dispensation. We can talk about it. My own feeling is that this is the red line for the military. And the other red line is military's insistence that it would stick to 2008 constitution. Anything more than that will not be acceptable to the military as of now. My final issue and question is, what is India's role in this highly complicated situation? My own research and reading suggest that India has been following a very wise, prudent, and calibrated policy. It is really a dual-track policy, which entails that we will continue to provide political support to the cause of democracy, but at the same time, we would need to maintain good communication and, if possible, collaboration and cooperation with the present government in Naypyidaw. Now, in that light, I think it's very important for us in India to appreciate that our country has extensive interests in Myanmar, and therefore we cannot simply leave only the Ministry of External Affairs and its counterparts, or let's say the central government and its counterpart in Naypyidaw alone to manage this relationship. Naturally, they are the prime stakeholders, but all of us, business, media, universities, strategic community, women leaders, youth, all of us do also have a responsibility, and therefore we must try to think and reflect as to how we can also play an appropriate role in this highly complicated situation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Bhatia. You have really provided a solid start to the international seminar as the first speaker. You have provided some interesting insights and raised some extremely pertinent questions. Thank you so much. I would now request Ambassador Veena Sikri to speak and share her views with us. Ambassador Sikri is facing some technical difficulties, so she'll be doing it in audio only. Over to you, Ambassador Sikri.
Has it come through? Can you see it now?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah, it is coming on and off, so it might go off anytime in the middle, so that's all right. Okay, well, thank you. I'd like to thank the Tillotoma Foundation and Kamakshi for organizing this seminar on a very important subject. I'm glad you did it last year. I remember that, and you're following it up this year, which is very good. I thank Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia for his excellent introduction. It is very comprehensive and very important to bring in all the players in the scene. I have been asked to speak on the Bangladesh angle in the context of Myanmar. And in doing so, I'd like to bring in a few other issues which are very important for India and for the region, which I think have sort of dropped off the table, as it were, in the situation. And I here I'd like to focus a bit on the Arakan region of Myanmar. I'm saying this because even from 2017 onwards, even when the refugees came into, the Rohingya refugees came into Bangladesh in very large numbers, even at that time, we did see a great reluctance from ASEAN. ASEAN did not or could not or did not want to play any active role in this situation. And of course, Bangladesh was very, very keen because they were facing the brunt of the issue with having, 770,000 at that time in August 2017. But if you add the remaining who were already there, well, more than 1 million refugees in Bangladesh. I must congratulate the government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for her statesman-like approach in actually accepting those refugees, putting them in camps. The army has given them, biometrics, and so there's a record of them. But the situation behind the refugees, this is still very uncertain. How did it happen? What happened? For example, I want to mention one or two things here that, Bangladesh and Myanmar have been good friends. They've had a good relationship. They've been trying to do things on connectivity. Bangladesh is fully appreciative that Myanmar is a very important conduit for Bangladesh's relationship with the rest of ASEAN. So for them, connectivity, the BCIM project with China and so on, it was going along very well. The Rohingya refugees had come in 1982, about 2 lakhs, had been negotiated with Myanmar, went back. Came in 1992, about 2.5 lakhs, negotiated with Myanmar and UNICEF, went back. Now, this time, what happened? In 2016, we had an attack on the Myanmar army by ARSA. I'm bringing in ARSA at this point because this is a known terrorist organization, a fundamentalist organization, which was written about a lot in 2016 after that first attack on the Myanmar army. Then it dropped off the scene in 2017. And I want to bring another issue in 2017. Aung San Suu Kyi, who was a leader at that time, had commissioned the Kofi Annan report. And the Kofi Annan report had some solutions for the Rohingya crisis, which was a start. That was not allowed to go through. On the very day that the Kofi Annan report was released, the attack on the Myanmar army took place, and you had the huge retaliation by the Myanmar army and lots of these refugees coming in. Now, somebody who did not want that Kofi Annan report to move further has played a big role in this, and after that, the Kofi Annan report is dead in the water. This is one aspect of it. The role of ARSA has dropped off the wayside, but now, as we look at 1 year after the February 2021 coup, it has come back again. In the Rohingya camps in Bangladesh, you've had in the last 4 months, for example, a killing, lots of killings over the years, lots of killings, but a very senior, respected Muhibullah refugee, Rohingya refugee, who was playing a role in a peaceful solution to the crisis, talking in international forums, UNHCR and others. He was shot dead. And the name of ARSA has come up again. 10 days ago, an interview was given by none other than the chief of the Arakan army in Myanmar, interview given to the leading Bangladesh newspaper, where again the name of ARSA comes up as a player, because he said that in the Arakan army, we're trying to take in the administration and the judiciary, we're trying to take in the Rohingyas and give them a space, but some of them have taken their weapons and gone off to ARSA. We are very disappointed. Now, I'm bringing this in because this very role of federalism that Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia spoke about is critical. The army has been struggling with this concept of federalism for a long time, and they have not come to a solution. The Arakan army was one of the strongest against the central army. They still have control over large parts of Arakan. The army has now made peace with them. They're no longer a terrorist organization, and they're trying to find their voice in the world. There is a talk going on about giving Arakan, if Arakan is given some kind of semi-autonomous role, they will give a role for the Rohingyas and the refugees will go back. I think this aspect, ASEAN has fought shy of this aspect, but the role of fundamentalism in this is becoming bigger and bigger in the camps in Bangladesh. Sex trafficking, human trafficking, and yaba, drug trafficking, is huge. And this is what is affecting even India and the region. In millions of tablets of this yaba drug are being trafficked by the Rohingyas themselves. And anybody who talks about repatriation of refugees is shot dead. In 2017 itself, the Myanmar government and Bangladesh had concluded an MOU and the repatriation should have started. But it did not, because A, the UN insisted it should be voluntary, and B, that anytime anybody wanted to start the repatriation on a voluntary basis, he or she was shot dead and no repatriation ever took place. Now, I think we have to work in tandem as we are looking for a solution. And of course, Ambassador Bhatia has mentioned very interesting options for that. I think we should also look at how this problem can be solved. Otherwise, in this region, for us in India, we also have some Rohingyas here. It is going to be a security problem for a long time to come. So I think that this aspect of bringing in the role of any possible terrorist organizations is very important, and also bringing in this as a means for finding a solution for the federal structure in Myanmar that will allow some kind of reconciliation with all the ethnic groups. We have here a situation where the role of China has come in a way that is worrisome for ASEAN and for countries like Indonesia, because you've seen that China, through the present chairman as of 1st January, Cambodia, has been playing a very strange role. And we have some ASEAN parliamentarians who have come out with a statement in the last few days saying they don't accept the role that that Cambodia is playing as chairman of ASEAN because they feel it's integrated by somebody else. So there are a lot of strands behind the scene, trends behind the scene, pressures behind the scene, and unless a holistic view is taken for what is happening in Myanmar and the refugee problem in Bangladesh, we will not get a lasting solution. ARSA seems determined to find shall I say, a land for itself, a country for itself in some part of Arakan, and they are resisting any other option for the refugees to go back. They are resisting the breaking up of the refugees and them going off into a Bhasan Char, as Bangladesh government has decided. This is being opposed by the hardliners led by ARSA. So they are resisting anything except for this of the homeland. Arakan army chief, in his interview with the Bangladesh newspaper a week back, spoke about this and said, you can't suddenly impose a new history on our region. You can't suddenly bring in the Arabs having taken over some part of Arakan and now you want a homeland for yourself. So it's a very complex situation, but don't try and deal with just the Myanmar military and please deal with this issue itself. You will not have peace in Myanmar without it. We have in Myanmar a lot of friends in the women's movement. My group, South Asia Women's Network, is in touch with a lot of people. Some of them have been jailed. Some of them are still in jail. We have been mounting a lot of programs to get them free. This is a very, very sensitive situation there. But I think to bring the Myanmar army around, we need to bring in all aspects of the situation, and then we could have a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Sikri, for excellent analysis and observations. My next speaker is Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, former Secretary East MEA. Over to you, Ambassador Wadhwa.
Kamakshi, thank you very much, and my thanks to Tillotoma Foundation also for giving me this opportunity. We've had two wonderful presentations by my senior colleagues, Ambassador Bhatia and Ambassador Veena Sikri. And that has really given us a great picture about what's been happening as a background, not just in Myanmar, but also from the Bangladesh angle, the Rohingya issue, etc., etc. What I'm going to do is to concentrate on two main issues. One is talk about what has been happening on the ASEAN front a little bit more in detail. And secondly, I will talk much more about the Indian interests in Myanmar, which has made us take a line which, as Ambassador Bhatia said, has been the middle path. First of all, about ASEAN. If we recall, the ASEAN leaders, had met Myanmar's junta chief Minong Liang, that was in Jakarta, and that was April 25, 2021. Here, they reached a 5-point consensus on tackling the political crisis in the country, And we all thought that this was a very good going as far as ASEAN is concerned. Of course, initially, Philippines, Cambodia, and Thailand had insisted that ASEAN should not take a position because it should not interfere in the internal affairs of a fellow ASEAN country. But then we had Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. They were insistent on a return to democracy and the release of the democratically elected leaders. So in this 5 point consensus, we had some very important points. One was the immediate cessation of violence in Myanmar. Was Second was the constructive dialogue amongst all the parties concerned to seek a peaceful solution to the interests of the people. Thirdly, mediation to be facilitated by an envoy of the ASEAN's chair with the assistance of the Secretary General. Fourth was humanitarian assistance provided by ASEAN. And fifth was a visit by a special envoy and delegation to Myanmar to meet all the parties concerned. So the fact that ASEAN's initiative emphasized to facilitate mediation of a dialogue process and meet with all the parties concerned, this is one of the few times that the organization had ever explicitly offered to work directly with a party that was not in power amidst its member states' internal conflict. So that is notable. But then, the military junta did not move on the ASEAN 5 point program. And there was a visit to Myanmar by the ASEAN Special Envoy, Erywan Yusof. This was cancelled after the junta would not allow him to visit Aung San Suu Kyi or any members of the National League for Democracy. So as a result, ASEAN decided not to allow Minang Liang to attend the ASEAN summit meeting. This was, of course, not the main reason. There were other reasons as well. But this suggested at least a tough line taken by ASEAN, unlike its earlier consensus-based approach to issues of the past. But now, as was referred to by Ambassador Sikri, Cambodia has taken over as the coordinator of ASEAN. And last week, Hun Sen, the Cambodian leader, decided to visit Myanmar, saying he was trying to push for a return to peace in Myanmar. At the end of a visit, a statement was also issued, and the Cambodian foreign minister said that the visit was a positive step towards implementation of the 5 point consensus. However, we've seen criticism from within the ASEAN, which is, again, has been pointed out earlier, it's totally split now on how to deal with Myanmar. And there is actually unhappiness in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore that Hun Sen, who's close to China, is trying to get Myanmar into the ASEAN process without fulfilling the conditions which were in the 5 point program. Hun Sen, as we all know, did not insist on a meeting with the opposition, including Aung San Suu Kyi, while in Myanmar, and his endorsement of the statement appears to be somewhat of a problem. There was an ASEAN foreign ministers meeting which was scheduled on 18th to 19th January in Cambodia. That has now been postponed. This has been attributed to a difference in approach to engaging with Myanmar and also inviting the junta foreign minister to the meeting. Of course, the ostensible reason is that we have COVID at the moment, so it's very difficult to meet, in any form. But apparently, the approach has this backing of China and Japan as well. So we'll have to see what happens going forward. What has been the Indian approach? Well, of course, and the importance that Myanmar presents to India, it's very geographically significant, as we know, for India because it's considered to be our gateway to Southeast Asia. The only Southeast Asian country that shares a land border with northeastern India, because there are four northeastern states: Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram, all very sensitive states which share boundaries with Myanmar. So it is both a part of India's neighborhood first policy and also Act East policy. And we are Myanmar's fourth largest trading partner after Thailand, China, and Singapore. We have some very important ongoing geostrategic projects in Myanmar, ranging from Sikri port in the Rakhine state, which is supposed to be an answer to Chinese fronted Chaopiu port, which will, of course, cement Chinese footprint in Rakhine. And then, of course, we also need to push on our connectivity projects, which are very important, like the trilateral highway, which links India's northeast with Thailand via Myanmar. And then we have the Kaladan multimodal project, which has been hanging fire for quite some time now, which would be very helpful in integrating the northeast with Myanmar, connecting Kolkata to Sikri by sea, then Sikri to Lasio in Myanmar via the Kaladan River, and then from last year to Mizoram and India by road. So India and Myanmar are both part of the BIMSTEC and the Mekong Ganga cooperation grouping besides the ASEAN India engagement. And in 2020, if we recall, India had gifted Myanmar Navy its first submarine, which had been refurbished and modernized by Hindustan Shipyard Limited. Now, ever since the coup, Chinese economic grip over Myanmar has become tighter, with a special focus on projects which are critical for the China-Myanmar economic corridor. And as Ambassador Sikri pointed out, a flare-up on the Rohingya issue in Myanmar can have serious implications for India's security in the northeast, especially after the linkage of Pakistan in training militants amongst the Rohingya community had come to light a few years ago. And then India started cooperating with the Myanmar authorities against the Rohingya insurgent groups at that time. So India needs the cooperation of Myanmar's authority because we have a more than 1,600-kilometer long Indo-Myanmarese border, which can result in cross-border movement of militants, of illegal arms and drugs, and is extremely porous. This border runs along hilly and inhospitable terrain. It can provide cover to activities of various insurgent groups. And if we recall, in 2019, India and Myanmar had carried out joint operations. It was Operation Sunrise and Operation Sunrise 2. This was in their respective territories to destroy several insurgent camps. But the threat to the Kaladan highway still continues, and India therefore has to engage with whoever is in charge in Myanmar. So in that context, there was the recent visit of Foreign Secretary Harsh Singla, and truly it was an exercise in tightrope balancing. Of course, he met with the top state administrative council leadership and also the political parties, including the LND in Naypyidaw, as well as Senior General Wenong Yang and the representatives of the civil society, as well as a group of select ambassadors in Yangon. So it was a very comprehensive visit. And India has supported the ASEAN line on Myanmar, and as Ambassador Bhatia said, has wisely refrained from any offer of mediation, leaving this task to the ASEAN. So it is not just India actually which has sent an envoy to Myanmar. We've also had Bill Richardson, the former US ambassador to Myanmar, and currently the New Mexico governor. He visited in November, as did Japanese Special Envoy Sasakawa. So India has kept the US, the ASEAN, and Japan all informed of the visit. And the issue of border security and stability, including the issue of Myanmaris seeking shelter in Mizoram, of course, were taken up during the visit. So was the issue of India's economic and developmental projects in Myanmar. And at least one Manipur insurgent group, which is called the People's Liberation Army, which took responsibility for the killing of Assam Rifles commander in November, is thought to be fighting with the junta against civilian resistance groups, which are called the People's Defense Force, which the National Unity Government has owned as its armed wing. And last year, if you recall, 30,000 people from the Chin state had come up and taken refuge in neighboring Mizoram, which is the same ethnic grouping. In fact, Mindat, which is 100 kilometers from the Indian border, was the early symbol of resistance to the Myanmarese army. And also the Chin Defense Force and the headquarters of the Chin National Force, which is called Camp Victoria, is on the Indian border. So the junta has actually carried out airstrikes in a village in Kalay Township, which is just 150 kilometers south of Moreh. And people defense groups have been active in Tamu, the border town, which is opposite Moreh, which is the main crossing point between India and Myanmar. Now, the PLA appears to have been roped in by the junta to fight the People's Defense Forces. And ahead of the visit of Foreign Secretary Shringla, the Myanmaris handed over 5 Manipuri militants to India from the Revolutionary People's Front, which is an organization which is allied to the PLA. A number of Indian insurgent groups, mainly Manipuris rather than Nagas, which was the case earlier, have been roped in by the Myanmarese army because they're short of people in that region. And there are fears that the PLA, while fighting with the Myanmarese army, could actually hone its skills and then be able to carry out attacks across the border into India. So it would be very prudent to keep up this dialogue and the occasional bilateral visits to take care of Indian interests in Myanmar. And at the same time, India will need to keep in touch with the civil society and also the opposition in Myanmar and also the other pressure groups, because that's something which is an investment for the future. So let me stop there. Thank you very much, Kamakshi.
Thank you, Ambassador Wadhwa, for your pertinent analysis and observations regarding the ASEAN and Indian approach to the Myanmar crisis. My next speaker is Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh, Head, Southeast Asia and Oceania Center, MP-IDSA. After this, we will go for an in-depth interactive discussion session. Over to you, Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh. Please unmute Dr. Udai. You are on mute.
I would like to thank Tillotoma Foundation for giving me this opportunity to be part of this webinar today. And already eminent panelists have spoken on this very important subject. Ambassador Bhatia, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Ambassador Veena Sikri. And I can only add to what they have spoken my little bit. The point to be noted is that we have seen a very turbulent year last year, when all these initial hopes of the century for this area were in a way shattered. The hope for getting democracy back on track in Myanmar, those were shattered by this coup that took place in February. And when this happened, the Myanmar military, headed by Senior General Min Aung Hlaing, he has changed the system entirely. The general who took over power then has now declared that the government plans to hold a fresh general election in August 2023, after the state of emergency is lifted. Now, he is saying that depending on state stability and peace, we are making our utmost effort to hold a multi-party election in August 2023. And it was in the middle of all this that Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla, he went there on December 22nd and 23rd. And the idea was to strengthen the close ties between India and Myanmar because of the strategic location of this country, as has been mentioned. Now, the military rules through a newly formed body, the State Administrative Council, and after annulling the November 2020 elections, in which we must remember that Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy had won as much as 396 of the 476 parliamentary seats. The Army's party had done badly, USDP, and got only 33 seats at that time. Now, because the military refused to accept the results, and because there is also a lot of ethnic minority voters who were excluded, but as a whole, there was not supposed to be much of evidence of systematic electoral irregularity in that. So the elections had been fine, but now the National Unity Government, which was set up as a government in exile, it has drafted a federal democracy charter. They have kept the ethnic minorities in mind. Mainly, we must remember that the biggest problem that Myanmar faces, I would say, is not political. It is mainly an ethnic issue. Myanmar is confronted by this ethnic problem for a very long time, right since its independence in 1948. The new NUG has established, tried to organize a People's Defense Force with the support of the ethnic armed organizations. The civil disobedience movement has also, which followed the coup, many people have been brutally killed. Many have been arrested, thousands have been arrested. But the main problem that we see, that the economy of this country, which is already a least developed country, that has been impacted very badly. It was on the path to economic reform since 2011. But after the coup, now economic growth seems to have stalled very badly. It has halted the rise of the garment industry in its tracks and pegged the dependence on gas and oil export alone. According to certain estimates, Myanmar will be the worst economic performer, at least in Southeast Asia, in 2021-22. Myanmar's economy was expected to contract by another 1% in 21-22. There's rising unemployment. The chart, the local currency, will depreciate further. Myanmar's current account balance will also fall deeper into deficit in the coming year. Tourism obviously will be impacted, and cross-border trade with Thailand and China will be perhaps the only one which will see it through, because oil and gas sectors will not stop producing. In addition, the economic crisis could trigger a refugee outflow to India and other countries. Internationally, we have seen a number of reactions. While the West has again resorted to targeted sanctions against military officials, the ASEAN approach, as has been mentioned, has been somewhat ambivalent, and because of lack of unity. And because now Cambodia is the ASEAN chair, we have to see how, following this visit by Hun Sen, and how things are going to pan out for ASEAN in the months to come. Thailand also has some affinity with the Myanmar military regime. Japan has also retained some close ties. Another player is, of course, Russia, which has stood out as a supporter of the Tatmadaw. Now, China's foreign minister had visited in 2021, and others had followed, other diplomats of China to Myanmar. China is going to play an important role in all this. It has a 2,100 kilometer long border with Myanmar, and mainly it seeks access to the Indian Ocean through Myanmar. Its influence has grown and will grow further. And the problem is, as I see it, the West is trying to, has not perhaps understood that we are in a different time zone at the moment. We cannot apply this kind of solutions that we did in the earlier stage when the military was in power, that is sanctions and boycott. They are probably not going to work now. And Beijing has found an opportunity again to expand its economic and strategic footprint, because Myanmar needs its economic support in trade, investment, and military arms, and diplomatically. China's flagship project, BRI, in Myanmar, which is known as the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, which is 1,700 kilometers long. That is what the Chinese have their eyes on. Earlier, during the Chinese president's visit to Myanmar, 33 important agreements were signed. And earlier, before that, in 2018, Myanmar and China had signed an MOU to establish CMEC. So we have on our eastern border, we have CMEC. On the other side, we have China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And that is perhaps what makes our reservations on the BRI quite visible to the Chinese. The 1,700 kilometer corridor is meant to connect Kunming to Myanmar's economic hubs, first to Mandalay and then to Yangon and west to Chokfu. Now, these are some of the issues that we faced. There is a totally, if you compare the kind of infrastructural cooperation that China has with Myanmar, our infrastructural cooperation with Myanmar is minuscule by comparison. Our main projects, the trilateral highway and the Kaladan multimodal project, these are yet to be completed. So we are lagging behind. Chokfu is a deep sea port. Sitwe, which we have interest in, that is not deep enough. So while many countries have condemned the February 1 coup, 8 countries were represented at the Myanmar Armed Forces Day Parade. India was one of them. Our defense attaché was there. There were others like the Russian Deputy Defense Minister and DAs of Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Now, what are our stakes there? Ambassador Wadhwa has, of course, given in much greater detail. But just to touch on it, Mr. Shingla's visit to in this visit, he met not only the military rulers, but also representatives of NLD and civil society. Now, Myanmar is important not only from the point of view of neighborhood first, our Act East policy, our Indo-Pacific policies also. For all these things to succeed, all our policies to succeed, we need to make sure that our role there does continue. We support ASEAN centrality, ASEAN's 5-point consensus formula. And if you just go back into the past, in October 2020, it was a joint visit by the Foreign Secretary and the Army Chief, which had taken place to Myanmar. So we had perhaps visualized that we need to be on the right side of both the military and the democracy movement there. And now we are in a new stage altogether when this geostrategically important country impacts India in various ways, particularly for our 4 northeastern states, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, and Mizoram. And the killing of the commanding officer of the Assam Rifles recently, along with a number of other people in it, that shows the gravity of the situation for our northeastern borders. The Arakan army on the Myanmar side has already been spoken about. We have cooperated with them earlier in Sunrise 1 and Sunrise 2 operations. The refugee influx into Mizoram has been a concern. It's been a concern also because we need to work together with our northeastern state. The center and our states have to be in tandem in dealing with the situation there. There is a lot of influx of refugees into Mizoram. The position taken by Mizoram on the refugee and insurgent issues could be viewed either as a challenge or an opportunity for us. We need to utilize this opportunity carefully. Does that lesson of India realizing that counterinsurgency effort on the Indo-Myanmar border, we cannot do so without the support of the regime at the helm in Myanmar? Because that has been our perception that we need to cooperate with whoever is in power. But we also need to remember that this current situation in Myanmar is a different situation from what was previously. So perhaps we will need a newer response to this newer situation. Or the central government heed the loud voice of a small state in Mizoram? Can it ignore the voices of the periphery? These are some of the questions which also we need to consider. While India was concerned about democratic gains made by Myanmar over the previous decades, we should not forget that there is a present danger that is growing, and international isolation of Myanmar is again pushing the country into dependence on China. Finally, it is the security imperative that prompted India to deepen military-to-military ties. which led us to give them even the submarine, kilo-class submarine to Myanmar. But we have also seen that the very next day after the Foreign Secretary left, the Myanmar Navy got a submarine from China. So, and China continues to be a key arms supplier to Myanmar. Now, from my perspective, the New Delhi's options in Myanmar would depend on how the situation evolves on the ground. It remains to be seen if the military can continue in the face of the civil disobedience movement that is there. The nature of the relationship between the Tatmadaw and China will be crucial. If it leads to greater dependence on Beijing, it will impact on India's security very negatively. And apart from the civil-military conflict in Myanmar, the country, as I mentioned, is a hotbed of ethnic conflict. If the country slips into another extended civil war, it will be a problem for our Northeast. The implications on national security and countering insurgency will have to be kept in mind. And the other responsibility that India has, of course, is a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. India can play a moderating influence, perhaps along with countries like Vietnam, which are also members of as non-permanent member of UNSC. We need to ensure that a supportive international environment is built up through international and regional structures. We need to ensure that Myanmar as a region, as a country, copes with the COVID-19 pandemic, because it would be only appropriate that neighboring countries, including India, prevent the country from failing. But not only failing, but we also need to ensure that it emerges as a successful ASEAN state. That is where I will end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh, for your remarks. You have provided a sound analysis of the issue. Let us get to the questions and have an interactive discussion session. The panelists can feel free to make further comments and pose questions. An audience member is who will take the onus of giving shelter to the Rohingya refugees, since their responsibility is shunned by most the countries. I would request Ambassador Veena Sikri if she can answer this.
Yeah, well, that is a very tricky question. That has been the question from day one. I think that the problem is you cannot look at this Rohingya issue as just a contemporary issue. It has a previous history. That who are the Rohingyas? Are they all unitarily belonging to Malaysia, to Myanmar, or are some of them from Bangladesh and from Myanmar? So this is a critical issue, but why it is so intrinsically linked with the stability of Myanmar today is also a very important aspect we looked at, because you cannot find a solution until you find the solution within Myanmar itself. The general in Myanmar, I mean, he is got to first look at his own internal unity. And for that, he's looking at all these various ethnic groups that have been referred to so often in the discussion today. I mentioned about the role of the Arakan army. It has such a strong control in Arakan that the general has been forced to call truce, really, with the Arakan army and declare that the Arakan army is no longer a terrorist organization. This is a very major concession given. And this could be the start of a way for the Myanmar central administration led by the army at the present to look at the issue of federalism. Are they going to give these individual units their own space? Is it going to be a genuinely federal structure of the kind, for example, the Indian federal structure, the American federal structure? You have many examples worldwide of successful federal structures, which the Myanmar army has to look at, the Myanmar government at present led by the army. So only if they get a stable federal structure, then within that, the Arakan region will look at what to do with the Rohingyas. I think that today the space for the general to give any leeway for the Rohingyas is over. I don't think he can, because really whatever he does or does not want to say on the Rohingyas is going to be decided by the Arakanese. And the Arakan army is holding the general to to ransom really on this issue. So I must tell you that the Bangladesh government is deeply worried and quite frustrated by the lack of global focus on the Rohingya issue. They even tried to appeal to the OIC, but that too did not carry very far. What is worrisome is that because I mentioned the influence of the violent groups like ARSA, because of this influence, people are running away from the Rohingya camps. In fact, the population in the Rohingya camps is falling. It's amazing. I mean, so many babies are being born every day and every month, but the overall population is falling because people are deserting the camps. They're doing anything to get a Bangladesh ID card, or they're getting onto the boats and leaving, or they are maybe infiltrating into India. I won't be surprised if that is a problem, definitely a problem. They're going off to Thailand, they're going off to Malaysia and hoping to get shelter there. So it's a problem which the reduction in the number of refugees in the camp is rather alarming even for the Bangladesh government. Where are these people going? As far as the Bangladesh government is concerned, they don't allow intermarriage. There's an executive order which bans intermarriage between the Rohingyas and the Bangladesh citizen. A Rohingya cannot marry a Bangladesh citizen so as to run away from his identity. So it's a very difficult situation, and they have no access to education. Recently, they have been given access, but they have no access to jobs. So they're going off into illegal activity, including drugs and yaba smuggling and all that, human trafficking, sex trafficking. It's a humanitarian issue, but it's a very serious socio-economic crisis, and it can affect the entire region, not just things. So I would say that there is the need now, there is urgency now for this issue to be brought onto the agenda, maybe by the Myanmar government, definitely, by anybody negotiating with the Myanmar government, definitely, and even for ASEAN to look at it. They have not looked at it so far, and they need to look at it very much. Otherwise, there is nobody willing to give refuge. The OIC countries themselves have not. But you have to see who is leading ARSA. It is a Pakistani Rohingya who used to be living in Saudi Arabia, now perhaps back in Pakistan. And the DGFI, the intelligence agency of the Bangladesh, there's been a lot of confusion there as well. Are they supporting the ARSA? Are they talking about a violent solution with Myanmar? I mean, there was a lot of talk of it at one time, which has now died down, fortunately. But you do have this coming up. You have the Chinese who say they are the friends of Myanmar, of the central government, but they're giving weaponry to the Arakan army, they're giving weaponry to the Wars, I mean, they're giving weaponry all over. So it's a very, very vexatious, and these issues must be looked at before the Rohingya issue can be solved. There's nowhere near solution at all. Yeah.
May I?
Yes, Ambassador Bhatia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to make 2 points in response to both the interventions made by Ambassador Veena Sikri. I think the first relates to the question of Rohingyas. This whole business of very sad plight of over 1 million people driven out of Myanmar into Bangladesh on the basis of arms is something that is a very serious issue. But we have to see it from the viewpoint of the Myanmar parties. And here we have to appreciate both the military and the the political parties, particularly NLD, were more or less on the same page. You remember how enthusiastically Madame Aung San Suu Kyi extended public support to the military's actions, saying it is not genocide, these people don't belong here, and if they have gone, we can certainly try to bring them back, but actually nothing was done. So there is a complete convergence between the NLD leadership and the military on this question. And that is the reason why, despite a formal agreement between Bangladesh and Myanmar, no progress has taken place. Probably maybe a handful of Rohingyas were accepted back. The rest have not been accepted back and probably are unlikely to be accepted back. This is a central issue that we have to keep in mind. The other point that I want to make is that on the question of federalism in Myanmar, it is a complete no-no with the Myanmar military. Myanmar military's thinking always has been consistently that this is a union, it is not a federation. And it is only under great stress and pressure when the 2008 constitution was made and subsequent discussions took place, military moved to accept the concept of federal union. It is something very similar to what we used to have the debate, a federal system, but with a very strong center. So this idea that individual states of Myanmar will have autonomy, they will have their own chief ministers elected by the people there, and that various provinces will have their own militias incorporated into the Myanmar army while retaining their own sort of independence. This is a complete no as far as the Myanmar military is concerned. It was so in the past, it is so at present, and probably it is likely to continue. So we have to think through by accepting and understanding, not accepting, but understanding the ideology of the Myanmar military.
Yeah, if I may, I just, I fully accept what Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia has said. And it's important to know that this is what the military has been saying, but it is also important to see that this thinking has been preventing a solution. And in fact, the situation with the Arakan army, to use just that example, because we're talking about the Rohingyas, the situation with the Arakan army became so serious that their control of regions of Arakan became so strong, with them appointing their own administration and judiciary and police in some regions of Arakan, that the army had to come in and virtually call a truce and do a deal with the Arakan army and say, okay, we'll say that you're no longer a terrorist organization, which is a big sense of relief, but the control of the Arakan army over those regions continues. So ultimately, it is the civilian population which is suffering in Arakan and in other parts. And I mentioned this particularly because the Arakan army is thinking of its own solution to the Rohingya issue. The Buddhists of the Rakhine region of Arakan, the Rakhines, they want a different solution. So it's and of course the Rohingyas want their own solution. They want their own area. And they've also talked it out. I mean, if you recall, they even wanted that area to be given to East Pakistan in 1947, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah turned it down, because at that time maybe the British would have actually carved out some portion and given it, but it was turned down by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So I think I agree. I know that the Myanmar military has not spoken about, will not, and will in the future also not speak about federal structures in any meaningful way. But some via media giving space to the ethnic groups is necessary to find a solution.
Thank you, Ambassador Sikri. Thank you, Ambassador Bhatia. It was really a pleasure to hear you both. Our next question is that what impact specifically do you think the Myanmar issue have for Indian geopolitical interest in the BBIN sub-region? This question is from my side to all the speakers. Anyone can come in first.
I think this is for Anil to take.
I think Anil should start off. Yes, good idea. Anil?
Okay, let me start off trying to answer that question. Of course, I already spoken a lot about how the Myanmar situation is going to affect India because of the geopolitics. But I think I also mentioned that we are important partners with Myanmar in two other organizations, which is of course the BIMSTEC, and we also have the Mekong Ganga cooperation. And in terms of the plans that India has of connectivity through Myanmar, there's a lot at stake. in the current situation, this is going to be extremely difficult for India, or for that matter, any other country, but say China. I think China is the only country which has managed to get its geostrategic projects back on track, so to speak. But other than that, all the other projects that other countries have are suffering from some constraint or the other. Now, in the case of India, of course, it's the ethnic problems which are there in the states in which the projects are located, or the provinces through which the projects are passing, especially the trilateral highway, for instance, and the Kaladan project. So for us to concentrate on that would be second priority. The first priority, of course, would be on how much our security in the northeast is affected, and how we can ensure that that security is not threatened. And once that is something which is taken care of, then of course, the projects can be concentrated upon as well. During the visit of the foreign secretary, the projects came up for a review, and of course, the emphasis from the Myanmar side was on the quick impact projects, which is actually taken off quite well with a number of countries. In fact, all the CMLV countries which have the quick impact projects have found them to be extremely useful. But as far as the mega projects are concerned, the government the military junta has to take its own steps to ensure that these projects go through. And right now, their energies are also concentrated on other things, and consolidation, on legitimacy, and also on fighting, the ethnicity issues. So I think that, I'm afraid, is going to take a back burner for some time. But these are our main constraints there.
Yeah, I just want to add uh, about a word about BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is now celebrating 25 years of its existence, dating back to the Bangkok Declaration of 1997. For last 2 years, it has not been able to hold its summit. Sri Lanka, which is the chair, continues to flit between the virtual format and the physical format, and as a result, no format conference has taken place. But the unspoken factor is the unstable situation in Myanmar. It does require a lot of political courage for a host country to think of inviting CNC Minong Lang to the BIMSTEC summit. And as long as the instability and the contestation within the country continues. So we are on the one side standing on the cusp of a major rejuvenation of BIMSTEC, which has been all crafted and agreed following the work as a sequel to the Kathmandu summit of BIMSTEC in 2018. But on the other hand, we are unable to go ahead with the summit because of the situation in Myanmar, and because undoubtedly of the strains in the relationship between Myanmar and Bangladesh. So we have a problem there on BIMSTEC. MGC, of course, has a slightly lower profile, but it is important. But Kamakshi, I wanted to say that the moment you say geopolitical imprint in Myanmar, it says to me only one thing. And this is the central point to note. India has to always guard against the expansion of Chinese footprint in Myanmar. India has no choice but to counter it and curb it and take whatever action is necessary in that direction. And that is the reason why that factor alone puts a lot of limits on India's policy towards Myanmar. This is something that we in India and the region must appreciate. And this is the reason why we feel, India feels, New Delhi feels, that our convergence with ASEAN must be promoted, because ASEAN has more or less the similar or same constraint in dealing with Myanmar.
Yeah, if I can add just few words, I agree with what Ambassador Bhatia and Ambassador Anil Wadhwa have said fully. But at the same time, yes, I think that China's position in Myanmar is very strong. But there are a lot of Myanmaris, even among the generals, who are very wary of China. And they know for a fact that China is running with the hare and hunting with the hound, running with the hounds and hunting with the hare, whatever that phrase, because they are giving arms on the one hand to the ethnic groups, and they are talking to the Myanmar generals about friendship and cooperation on the other hand. So they are with both hands they are actually harming the interests of Myanmar. And of course, it is also said that one of the reasons for the complete breakdown in communications between Aung San Suu Kyi and the general was that Aung San Suu Kyi was getting very close to China at that time, which was really not very much liked by the general, who always prefer to maintain their difference. But having said that, I think the issue of regional cooperation is important. And I think that this is something that we have to always keep in mind, because regional cooperation, working on shared issues, whether it is the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it is other health, public health and education issues, are always matters which help the people and make them feel better. I mean, imagine now, even in the time of crisis in Afghanistan, we're still giving help to the people of Afghanistan on with medicines and with wheat and so on. So that kind of humanitarian help for Myanmar certainly is very important for India to always consider, and we can do it regionally as well. And you mentioned BBIN. Of course, BBIN doesn't have Myanmar on it, but with the I think Bangladesh has the secretariat for BIMSTEC. But certainly, the whole issue of giving BIMSTEC the big push is very much stymied by the fact of the relationship with Myanmar. I agree completely with Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia on that.
Thank you so much. There is another question from my side. What do you think is the future of democracy in Myanmar? Shall we see multi-party democracy return to Myanmar in the near future? In the same context, what is the future of Aung San Suu Kyi? Can she make a comeback? I think we will close our discussion with this question, and this will be the final question for the evening. Yes,
I think
yes.
Udai should begin it.
Yes, if I may, I think it's a very significant question about where Myanmar is going now. We had all expected that in 2011 onwards, they would be Myanmar would really and truly be on the road to democracy, and the roadmap had already been laid down. But that one clause in the constitution which gave the military the right to intervene in case of an emergency, that clause and the clause which the articles which gave it additional powers of seats in the parliament and in the local legislatures and in the cabinet, all that all those were hidden powers left for the military in the 2008 constitution. Now, the question is, would the 2008 constitution be amended to restore the powers back to the military? Would there be greater democratization? Would there be a new constitution which would pave the way for more democracy? Because at the moment we are confronted with two opposing forces. One is the current junta in power, and the other is the civil disobedience movement, which we are seeing, helped along by the various ethnic armies, ethnic armed groups which are there. Now, unless and until some kind of agreement is arrived at with the military, I don't see democracy moving forward, especially in the context of the regional environment, where you have Thailand also, which has set the model for Myanmar. We thought that Indonesia had set the model for Myanmar, but now it seems they are following the Thai model. And if that be so, I don't see democracy returning for at least the next 4 years, 4 to 5 years in Myanmar. And so there is, but there is also no way that you can uh, ignore the civil disobedience movement which is there. So it is a totally emerging situation, and we will have to watch the Myanmar situation closely for us to be able to say that democracy can return before these 4 or 5 years. If suddenly things take a turn for the worse, then we may see a violent kind of a situation where democratic forces will be vying for power, but it will lead to a lot of confusion in our neighborhood. So I don't see a very peaceful Myanmar for at least the next 5 years. And they will be, even if democracy returns, even then it will not be a stable neighborhood. So in either case, we are confronted with problematic Myanmar in the next, at least foreseeable future.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree with that, and I think that something that hasn't been mentioned at all is this national unity group. This disparate group of people, all different parties coming together, and they're using each one is using the help of their respective ethnic armies to fight the Myanmar military. It has created a huge complication. But then these national unity groups claim to be democratic. They claim that we are the democratic forces, we are the new democratic forces, and they're getting support from all kinds of Western groups over there. You see, so but they clearly are incapable of any kind of coming together, and they have these village defense forces. The situation at the grassroots is extremely complicated. But Aung San Suu Kyi's name does not figure as a leader of any of these groups. So I think ever since the West decided to abandon her as an icon of peace and democracy, she has been abandoned rapidly by their own. At one point, she had a good role as a bridge between Myanmar military and the Western democratic forces who were lionizing her to the hilt. But after that, when she has been torn down from all her pedestals, the Myanmar army has abandoned her as well. So I don't see her having any kind of a role in the future.
I think to read the future in Myanmar, I think we have to bank on reading closely the history of this country. Since independence in 1948, Myanmar has experienced three models. Full democracy under Premier UNU in the beginning, military rule under General Nevin and subsequently other generals, including General Than Shwe. And the third was the hybrid democracy that we saw from 2011 to 2020. Hybrid democracy meaning limited democracy, that is, power was shared between the military and the political party that won election. Now we are back to military rule today. I think anybody who is talking about multi-party democracy has to be an extremely optimistic person as far as Myanmar is concerned. Sadly, we cannot be optimistic. We have to be realistic. And therefore, the best we can expect today for this country is that it is able to go back to the 2008 constitution of hybrid democracy. I think if in 2-3 years it could move to that position, it would be considered as progress. But on your second question, Kamakshi, a lot of people are asking that question. What is the future of Madame Aung San Suu Kyi? Each of us has our own ideas. I went to consult a very seasoned watcher of Myanmar who handled the Myanmar dossier sitting in Yangon at a very, very difficult time. He has in-depth knowledge, and I asked him this question. And the discussion with him revealed that really there are only three options that are possible. One, that she is freed and she retires from politics. The other is she is freed and she goes into exile. And the third is she stays in the jail. One cannot think of a fourth option at this stage. And I'm afraid probably all the options are options which may really not be acceptable to the people, to the party, and to the person concerned. So, while wishing our best to Madame Aung San Suu Kyi, who is still very much regarded in positive terms in India and the world, at this stage, realistically, we cannot be very optimistic about her future.
May I just also put in my two bit here? I think I would agree, by and large with what has been said by the others. It seems that there'll be further polarization in Myanmar going forward. And the junta will have to face off against a number of opponents. That includes civilian resistance and also ethnic armed organizations. I think in 2022 at least, there's going to be a grinding stalemate in Myanmar that will compound what is happening politically, economically, and the humanitarian crisis which is looming. Many have said that there could be an impending civil war. I think I would not go as far as that. Of course, the role of the army is key in anything which happens over there. In any kind of democratic transition which has to come about, the army has to agree. And if you watch what has happened is that, Min Aung Hlaing has declared himself a prime minister, saying he plans to be in charge for 2 years during an extended state of emergency before he holds an election in 2023. And now, I suppose that even if he allows any semblance of elections to take place, he will probably ensure by the time that the army returns back to an invincible position by trying to change the rules on the ground. Otherwise, it's very difficult to see him agreeing to that. Until then, I'm afraid we are going to see a period of turmoil. Now, I agree with Ambassador Bhatia again on Aung San Suu Kyi that, already she's been sentenced to 6 years of imprisonment for many charges, inciting dissent against the military, breaching COVID rules, keeping illegal walkie-talkies, etc. There are a dozen charges pending, including incitement, violation of COVID protocols, violations of the Official Secrets Act, corruption. So if she's sentenced for all these, it'll combined maximum sentence could be more than 100 years. So I think some kind of a compromise formula would have to be found because the army has seen what has happened in the elections in the last time, where she took made some important gains, and the threat is that she could then marginalize the army totally. So that is the issue in Myanmar, and therefore I don't see her being forced to reckon with, because they would try their best to keep her out. At the most, you would have some sort of a solution if the democracy has to evolve in Myanmar or come back, in which the army retains the upper hand. It will be more like a hybrid situation which you used to have earlier, which Ambassador Bhatia referred to, possibly with the strengthened role for the army.
Yes, thank you so much. And okay, thank you, Ambassador Veena Sikri, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, and Dr. Udai Bhanu Singh for your presentations and your pertinent responses to the questions. I think we had a great discussion this afternoon. The Myanmar issue is something to observe closely as we all hope for peace and stability. I thank you all for joining this international seminar on the present situation in Myanmar, organized by the Tillotoma Foundation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.